Hey guys, Pete here. This will be my Watchmen Season 1, Episode 1 recap and review. The Watchmen HBO pilot episode is titled, It's Summer and We're Running Out of Ice, which is a lyric from the song Poor Judd is Dead from the play Oklahoma. The episode was written by showrunner Damon Lindelof, who you might know from his previous TV shows Lost and The Leftovers, and was directed by Nicole Castle, who I think did a magnificent job here. This video will contain spoilers for everything we saw in episode 1 and the source material, the limited run comic series / graphic novel Watchmen by Alan Moore and David Gibbons. I had really high expectations going in because I really loved The Leftovers and I also loved the original Watchmen book. I'd been watching everything and reading everything related to this new show, and I was in the danger zone of being too hyped and perhaps set up to get let down in light of those expectations, but so far so good. This episode is a great beginning to take us back into the Watchmen universe, in my opinion. The world building stood out as being impressive from where I was at, and I really like the way it feels like our world for the most part, with big changes under the surface as a result of the events that happened in the original story. Of course, this story doesn't start out in the same place as the original. Instead, we start out with an actual historical event, the Tulsa race riot of 1921. This is an event that I didn't learn about in school, and it's one that's worth looking into if you're just hearing about it for the first time now. The alternate reality that the original Watchmen created diverged from our history in the late 1930s when Hooded Justice put on a costume to start fighting crime. Everything that happened before that is the same as in our history. Everything that happens in the alternate history of the show follows what happened in the comics timeline when they diverged. In the opening flashback, we meet a young boy who's watching a Bass Reeves movie. We can see that he's seen it enough times to know the dialogue by heart, and while he's fully engaged, we find out that there's trouble brewing outside the theater. It is the riot, complete with airplanes. I read this in the wiki. I was like, wow, they actually used airplanes in this thing, and it's crazy. But his family gets him out alive with a note that reads, "Watch over this boy." The riot sequence is difficult to watch, although I think it's done as well as something like that could be, and it's difficult to believe that things like this happened in our not so distant past. The flashback ends with the boy waking up by the getaway car, which crashed after the driver and his wife were shot dead. He finds their baby nearby and walks away from the city alone. As we move forward to the present day, we learn a lot about how this alternate reality is different during a traffic stop. The cops wear masks, they need to record their interactions with consent, and they can't use their firearms without getting an authorization cleared through dispatch. I got a chill when the driver went to the glove box and we caught the first glimpse of the Rorschach mask, and loved when he described it as such to Panda on the radio. The scene ends with the cop getting shot up by the driver, who by then is wearing said mask, and with a head of lettuce tossed into his car for dramatic effect, our story is ready to unfold. We meet Chief of Police Judd Crawford, who is watching the play Oklahoma with his wife. He's pulled away to go to the hospital where the officer who was shot looks to be in critical condition. The new character, Looking Glass, is there to brief him on the situation, and his mask comes in handy when Judd needs a mirror to tie his tie. This scene and the one that follows at the police officer's home lay the groundwork for the lingering terror that the Seventh Kavalry bring into this world. A little bit later, we learn about the White Night, which was a coordinated attack on police officers, which is what led them all to wear masks, and even go as far as creating cover stories as to what they're doing while they're on duty. At a school career day, we meet Angela Abar and get a nice introduction to her cover story as being a retired cop turned baker. We learned that she was born in Vietnam, which according to comic canon became the 51st state after Dr. Manhattan helped the US win that war. As she makes mooncakes for the kids and fills us in on the state of affairs, things turn awkward when a smart-ass kid asks if Redfordations paid for the bakery. Her adopted son jumps on him, and we transition to their drive home, which is interrupted by a squid storm. This is a reminder that the world isn't the same as ours, and it's also a callback to the event that Ozymandias staged at the end of the comic. This and Redfordations both deserve a closer look, so I'll circle back to them at the end of the recap. When she returns home, we meet more of her family briefly before she gets a message on her pager about the shooting. We see her transform from baker mom doing a career day at her kid's school into the costume adventurer persona, Sister Night. She has a secret room in the back of the bakery, a kick-ass car that she drives like a person who wears that costume should drive it, and she heads straight to Nixonville, which is a trailer park. Not before having a conversation with an old man man in a wheelchair though, which includes him asking her if she thinks he could lift 200 pounds. She doesn't pay him much mind since she's on a mission, which ends in her having a guy subdued in the trunk of that car. At the police station, we watch a 7th Kavalry video that is clearly inspired by the words from Rorschach's journal. A side-by-side comparison reveals how they're taking his words and injecting their own white supremacist bent in there. And the bottom line here is that they're on a mission. This leads Chief Crawford to invoke Article 4, which is a 24-hour firearm release for the entire police force. We get insight into the friendship that Angela and Judd have before we see Looking Glass's interrogation pod, which is equal parts impressive and frightening. He concludes that the suspect knows where to find the shooter but won't give up the information sans motivation. Angela apologizes for her previous interaction with the suspect before beating the answers the police want out of him. This leads us to a cattle ranch where the 7K is holed up, removing old batteries from watches, and there we get some heavy-duty action that leaves quite a few cattle worse for the wear. We see that they are well armed, organized, have some serious tech in their security system, and that they're willing to die for their cause by taking poison pills. They also have a plane which they try to use to escape, but it's no match for the Archie-like police airship that Judd and Pirate Jenny are waiting in nearby. This battle ends with the police on top, and later we see the two families celebrating the victory with dinner at the Abar house. As I was watching the chief sing to the family, I got a feeling that this would be his last episode, and that's exactly where things go. After a conversation about the batteries and what the cavalry's mission might be, a cancer bomb perhaps, Judd falls into a trap and he ends up strung up in a tree. He had a heart of gold, he wasn't very old, oh why did such feller have to die? Poor Judd is dead. Rest in peace, Don Johnson. Angela gets a call from the old man in the wheelchair alerting her about this situation, and when she arrives on the scene, he's there waiting. He has the watch over this boy note on his lap, and we have ourselves a murder mystery complete with a drop of blood just like the original comic. This is where the episode ends and where we all say, what the hell is actually going on here? His murder and whether or not the old man did it is a nice setup for the main mystery, but there's also so much other stuff going on here. One thing I skipped over completely was Jeremy Irons and his raw thighs over in England. He looks to be well looked after, but beyond that, it's difficult to explain why his existence seems so far removed from the world we see the other characters inhabit back in Tulsa. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that he's playing Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias at this point, but that doesn't exactly explain why his servant would offer him a horseshoe to cut a cake that they gave him for his anniversary. What that anniversary is, where he is exactly, and what he's been doing since he saved the world from nuclear war by teleporting a squid into New York City, killing millions in the process, isn't in any way clear. The only thing that is clear is that he spends some of his time writing, and he's completed a new play called The Watchmaker's Son, which is absolutely a reference to Dr. Manhattan. This pilot had everything I could hope for. It had plenty of mystery, plenty of callbacks and references to the source material, which would take a whole video of its own to go into all of those. Nice character development, excellent world building, and it looked and sounded great. I'm confused about where it's going and what it all means, but not in a bad way. There are tons of little details that make rewatching a necessity, which is a nice tribute to the graphic novel, because the first thing I did after I read that was want to go back and read it again and pick up on all the things that are going on in the background of each scene. You know, it definitely brings that same kind of feeling. The 7th Kavalry are definitely the bad guys here, and they definitely have white supremacist ideology among their core beliefs. They're also clearly influenced by the writing in Rorschach's journal, as they use similar language in the video that they made, and that's where things start to get interesting. Rorschach died because he wanted to expose Ozymandias' plan. His journal getting out would undermine the official story of what happened at the end of the comic, and that's why it was important. The other characters weighed their choices and decided that exposing the truth would do more harm than good. They decided to keep the peace. They decided to keep the secret, and we have to assume that the story people in this alternate reality grew up with is that aliens actually did attack New York City back in the 1980s. The fact that these bad dudes are wearing Rorschach masks would indicate that they've read the journal and made it central to their identity. They are the bad guys, but they also happen to be right about the conspiracy to cover up the truth of what happened. In my mind, they can use that bit of truth to recruit all sorts of people, and I love that the writers are willing to take this kind of risk. When Looking Glass asked the prisoner, "Do you believe that trans-dimensional attacks are hoaxes staged by the US government?" I feel like Lindelof was yelling at us to look under the surface of what we see. movie. Then you pile on top of that the fact that the police and Angela specifically have a lot in common with Rorschach and his methods, while they're still the good guys and they're in their pursuit of justice. There's a lot of potential here for a really interesting story, and I can't wait to see how they navigate these waters. It could be tricky because we like characters who are created in shades of gray. We don't want the good guys to be all good and the bad guys to be all bad, but this is pretty serious stuff that they're dealing with here. And like I said, I enjoy that they're willing to take this risk, and I hope that they can pull it off. I mentioned that I would come back to the Redfordations. Robert Redford is president and has been for almost 3 decades in the alternate reality. In the original story, Richard Nixon, who we saw is now on Mount Rushmore, got term limits thrown out and was still president in 1986 when the story took place. According to interviews with the show's creators, he died in office. His vice president, Gerald Ford, took over until the end of that term, and then Robert Redford became president in 1992. At the end of the book, they mention that he's thinking of running for president. So that's where that idea came from. The Sundancer in chief is a big change because he's a liberal in contrast to his predecessors who were in office for a long time. During his presidency, reparations have been made for victims of racial violence. We'll learn more about that, I guess, as things go, but his political opponents have dubbed them Redfordations. The Smartass Kid gives us an idea of how they were received by the public, and that gives us some insight into the racial tension that is coming to a head around our characters at this time. Not to say that the world needs more racial tension, but you know what I'm saying. There's a lot going on and a lot to think about. One of the things I loved when I first read Watchmen was how they brought the individual characters' backstories into focus as the investigation into the murder mystery plays out. Lindelof has said several times that this has influenced his work. I think that shows in his previous projects. I think we're going to be going down that same road where we're going to learn more about all these characters. We see already that they are lacing in the history of the Minutemen, which is the predecessor group to all of the mass vigilantes that we know of in the current story. I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out to fill people in on the history that haven't read the original story. It's going to probably work a lot like the Black Freighter comic did in the original work, so it's a lot of cool stuff. I can't wait to see how it plays out. There's so many Easter eggs. I didn't go into a lot of them here. I would like to make a separate video about that after I do the trailer breakdown. Some of the things that popped out that I'll just mention quickly here, though, was that Chief Judd was reading Under the Hood by Hollis Mason, which is the basis of the American hero story Minutemen. It basically tells the tales of the original masked or costume vigilantes, costume adventurers. In the subtitles, there was an owl hooting when we saw him hanging from the tree, which could be interesting as to what his identity is. We also, of course, saw Angela drinking from an owl mug in his office. The new characters all seem pretty badass, so the history behind their story should be good, like a Looking Glass episode, more about Angela, who's definitely a cool looking character so far. Plus, there's still a lot of new characters that we know about that we haven't seen at all. Laurie Blake, Lady True, and many others. Learning more about the White Knight, Robert Redford's presidency. It seems that they're showing us that there was problems either way, whether it was Nixon in office or the liberal Redford. We know there's no cell phones. We saw her with a pager. There's no cell phones in this universe. There's no internet access. We see the cops using violence liberally, and no one seems very concerned about that. On a personal note, I was glad that they brought that idea about Vietnam being the 51st state into the story. I currently live in Hanoi. It's my adopted home, I guess you could say. Looking out of my balcony a few minutes ago, I can tell you for sure that it is not the 51st state of the United States, but it was pretty cool to see the mooncakes reference and some of the other things that were in there. I mentioned that I would come back to the idea of the squids falling from the sky. The first thing that came to my mind is, how would that smell? Like, if you've ever been in a market where they sell fresh fish, and squid in particular, it has an awful smell, and they were covering everything. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this came about. His event to usher in world peace or to end the nuclear holocaust, it involved a squid, but how that transformed into squid falling from the sky, like raining down, isn't exactly clear. I wonder what people think who are in I'm not really a big fan of comic book movies, and I wonder what fans of those think. Like, was this comic booky enough? Maybe too much, maybe not enough. I thought it was pretty cool. Like, I thought that it had a feeling of that. In particular, like inside the police station, and when we saw her getting ready, getting into costume, and then the way that she drove around, it was these little details that kind of fit in and augmented things rather than making it really like cartoonish. Overall, I thought the action was pretty slick. It didn't seem overdone. It was really well directed. Like I said, I think Nicole Castle did a really good job with it. And there were also some comedy nuggets tossed in there as well. There was quite a few things that put a smile on my face or made me chuckle under my breath. So it was pretty well rounded, and it pretty much delivered a feeling similar to what I got when I read the original story. So it'll be interesting to see what fans of the original thought of it, what people who never read it think about it. And if you want more details about things, I made several trailer breakdowns where I went pretty deep on the different imagery that we see. So you can pick that up there. But there is so much here that I just can't go into it in this video. So please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel. I want to do quite a few videos weekly on this because it's going to be a great ride as far as I can tell. Let me know in the comments what you thought, what you hope to see in the next couple of weeks, how you're hoping to see things play out. If you got questions about the original, I can answer those for you. If you have theories, I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. I will talk to you soon.